O Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all of us command. With glowing hearts we see thee rise, the true north, strong and free. From far and wide, O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. God keep our land glorious and free. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. Okay, welcome everyone. So our first agenda item is item 6, adoption of minutes of previous council meeting. May I have a motion? Deputy Mayor McIntosh, seconded by Councillor Post. Oh, one, yes, you go, I'm sorry. Councillor Post, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There is one issue in the minutes from the previous council meeting, which is item 6.2. It should read Councillors Peters and Post as opposed, not Councillor Taylor. But after that, I'm happy to second it.
Okay. With that change, previous council meeting 6.2.
It was the item with the waste diversion. Number 6, under staff reports. And it's number 6, item 2.
Opposition was Post and Peters. You've got Taylor and Peters voting in opposition. Okay, so with that correction, we have a motion. All in favor? Okay, that is passed. Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on to presentations and petitions. I'm sorry? Oh, yes. Okay. So earlier this evening, we had a closed session of council. And in that closed session, we had a couple of items that we want to report to. We're going to rise and report on appointments to Heritage Orangeville, where we have 5 appointees been approved by council. And also another item came up. This is a donation of land to the town of Orangeville by Brian's Fuel. And this was a piece of land on town line, very close to the railway, the rail yard. Madam Clerk, is that satisfactory? Okay. All right, moving on to presentations and petitions. I'm just going to, I'm sorry. Oh, okay, my apologies. Deputy Mayor McIntosh and seconded by Councillor Andrews. All in favor? Thank you. So we're going to get into our presentations, petitions, and delegations, but I just wanted to read this before we move on to the standard announcement we make. This meeting is being aired on public television and or streamed live and may be taped for later public broadcast or webcast. Your name as part of the public record will be included in the minutes of this meeting. To avoid disruptions during our meeting, we would appreciate if members of the audience would please turn off or mute your cell phones or other personal digital device. Thank you. Orangeville Town Council welcomes and encourages members of the public to comment on matters of interest to them. However, delegates are cautioned that derogatory or inappropriate remarks may constitute slander and could potentially lead to legal action against them. If such comments are made, the delegate will not be permitted to continue speaking, and the comments will not be recorded in the minutes of the meeting. All right, our first delegation is Mr. Grant Armstrong. Mr. Armstrong. Just wanted to remind you, Mr. Armstrong, we got a busy agenda tonight, so we've got 5 minutes set aside for your presentation. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. Do I have to? All right, perfect. Ladies and gentlemen, member of the council, thank you for having me out tonight. I'm here to talk about specifically Bylaw 95/2005, which is regarding the sale of animals in pet stores. Based on current industry trends, emerging public interest, and other changes in municipalities, suggests the ban the sale of commercially bred dogs, cats, and rabbits for profit by pet stores, retail establishments is in the best interest of the community for public protection, animal welfare, and pet care industry. Forgot I had all the fun stuff in here. The reasons are for the consumer protection. It reduces impulse pet purchasing at the retail level. It increases public awareness of adoptable pets and rescues, which are up to date in their vaccines, often microchipped, spayed, neutered, and also done at the appropriate age. Promotes responsible pet ownership. Rescues ensure that potential adopters are aware and prepared for the financial obligations, work and time that goes into having an animal. Home checks are often completed and care taken to match the right animal with potential adopters. Also protects consumers from purchasing ill-bred animals resulting in unexpected veterinarian costs. Protects consumers from purchasing animals that have not been socialized adequately, which can result in unexpected trainer costs and or aggression. And it also protects immunity from the spread of potentially highly infectious diseases. Okay? For animal welfare, forces responsible and ethical decision-making, helps reduce pet abandonment and or surrendering, helps prevent substandard breeding, reduces overpopulation and overcrowding, reduces the euthanasia rates of healthy adoptable animals within the shelter system. And we have some statistical information to share as well. And reduces the incidence of animal illness, death through infectious diseases. As you can see here, I won't go through the whole slide, but you can see at the years that we've been encouraging and pushing forward for these changes, you can see the euthanasia rate has dropped from 54% in 2008 to 19% in 2017, while the adoption rate has gone up almost 50% from 41 to 64%. Okay. For the pet care industry point of view, significant contribution to curtailing point of sale locations for potential puppy mills, demonstrate a genuine desire to contribute to improving animal welfare, consistent with PJAC's mandate, which states support legislation and regulations that operate in the best interest of the pets, the pet industry, and the public. And that's the Pet Industry Joint Advisory Committee, There are risks if we don't look at doing this. One of the first is the risk of additional pet stores opening and selling cats, dogs, and rabbits for profit. Result in increased impulse purchases. Customers potentially purchasing ill-bred and sick animals. Increase in contagious diseases throughout the community. Increase in abandoned and surrendered animals. An increase in animals needing homes for local shelters as consumers are not prepared for the cost of sick animals and those with behavioral challenges. Public support is definitely on this side as well. Over 8,300 supporting signatures through our online petition. Numerous formal letters and emails that have been sent to many of the councils as well as to the town. Just one of the testimonials here, and I won't go through the whole thing, but behavioral issues are prominent in animals sold for profit. Being taken away from their mothers at such an early age is detrimental to their development to navigate the world with confidence and manners. Okay? There's another one there as well. In the interest of time, I'll skip through that one. There's also a significant amount of industry support. Humane Society International Canada, the Association of Animal Shelters Administration of Ontario, numerous registered rescues, Orangeville and area veterinarians, Orangeville pet store managers and owners, Orangeville and area dog trainers, and there are 4 Orangeville pet stores that operate successfully currently without selling cats and dogs for profit. Most of them partner with rescues. These are just some of the towns that have passed the legislation in Ontario. And one of the concerns, like I said earlier, the more and more towns that pass it, forces some of these organizations to open up in towns that don't have these bylaws in place. Okay? We have the opportunity now to be progressive and deal with the overpopulation before it becomes a major issue. That's it.
Okay. Any questions, councillors? I have one. It's interesting you describe this as animals being sold for profit. Aren't all animals being sold for profit?
Under, are you, again, you know, I'm going to bring in one of my experts here. Sorry, I apologize.
I'm talking about breeders, you know,
Absolutely.
Canadian
So
Kennel Club breeders. I mean,
absolutely. You know,
huge
we're not
bucks there, right?
And you know, I will refer over, you know, go ahead.
That's okay.
Sorry.
So with ethical breeders, there's a lot of animal testing that's, oh, I'm sorry. Sorry. With ethical breeders, there's a lot of testing that goes into before breeding is done. There's x-rays with hips, gene pool regimens. There's going through the family history to ensure of no crossbreeding, which would then increase, if there was crossbreeding, it would increase the potential for defects within the puppies. So while they're making a little money, it does not cover the costs that they actually put into it. They're breeding for the betterment of the breed, as opposed to making a profit.
You're suggesting that
ethical-
dog breeders
An
don't make
ethical-
any money and they're not interested in
That's not
making
what-
money?
An ethical registered breeder is breeding for the betterment of the breed, not breeding for profit.
Okay.
And I'll just add in as well, the Canadian Kennel Club actually doesn't permit the sale of any registered Canadian Kennel Club animal through a pet store. You actually have to go directly to the breeder. So when you're buying an animal at a pet store, you're not necessarily dealing with the breeder directly, and you're not necessarily even dealing with a Canadian Kennel Club authorized breeder.
Oops, sorry, folks. Yeah.
That was on you, not me.
That was the 5 minutes.
I'll give you a couple more, go ahead.
Anyway, any other questions from councillors here? I've got Deputy Mayor McIntosh.
Thank you, Your Worship. With the recent information about the SPCA shutting down basically their inspection operations, you never mentioned any of that in your presentation. Do you care to comment on that, or are you aware of that?
We are aware of it, so I think this is an opportunity, like we said, to be progressive. The SPCA is stepping back on a lot of their policing activities and monitors. We're asking now the towns to step up. We have reached out to the SPCA, and they're asking to continue forth with these types of things at the municipal level while they wait, and we don't know what time the provincial level is going to get to it. So we need to put some type of process in place to help protect them.
Councillor Taylor.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Mr. Armstrong, for your presentation. For the public and for my fellow councillors, I have visited Dugan's and I've met with the staff and the ownership in that store, and I've also sat with Mrs. Armstrong and heard her story as well. So it's a leading question, but one of the things that bothers me about this whole issue is the public outcry that happened on social media, and candidly the I don't know, litigious nature that was, I guess I'm trying to say we hurt a business in town through some criticism that I think was undue and probably a little bit aggressive. When I asked the Armstrongs about that, you'd said that you didn't do any of that, and I just think it's important that you share that side of the story here in this public consultation, if you could, please.
Absolutely. This isn't about one pet store. This isn't about an industry and an opportunity for it to change. Today there is a pet store, and that's fine, and it's been in the community for many, many years. We recognize that this can change by being one of the only towns that don't have a bylaw, and we might get 12 more that come in over the next 6 years. We're talking about changing a culture, and this is not about one store, and we actually don't agree with taking a tax at Dugan's. We don't condone that. We don't support it in any way, shape, or form. We can't control social media. Social media is its own animal. But we want to say that we're not part of that organization that's attacking one specific store. It's not about that. It's about ensuring that we have protection for animals for today, as well as what could happen over the next couple of years. Does anybody want to add anything?
Councillor Taylor?
If I could?
Is it okay if I answer that?
In regards to Todd's question, we do know.
Excuse me, your name and your
sorry.
address, please?
Julie Everson. I was part of setting the petition up. In regards
And you live
to-
where, ma'am?
Pardon?
You live where?
I live here in Orangeville, just behind 7-Eleven.
Okay, thank you.
To answer your question, the main reason we need this bylaw is there is a store that opened in Aurora that was selling pets. Aurora passed the bylaw, that store closed, moved to another town. So I started in Richmond Hill, They passed, they moved to Aurora. From Aurora, they moved to Newmarket. Now Newmarket is pushing for the bylaw. They're looking at closing and moving somewhere else. We don't have proof, but we do know that some of their pets have been proven to come from puppy mills. If we don't pass the bylaw, the next closest store to Newmarket is Orangeville. Are they gonna move in and start selling puppy mill dogs that are sick and going to spread?
Okay, ma'am, you're starting to get into this defamation here. So I wish you would stop what
Oh,
you're
I'm
saying.
sorry.
We're going to retract what you've just said.
Sorry.
So your 5 minutes is up, folks. We're going to thank you very much for your bringing your points to the council.
Your worship?
Sorry?
Sir, I'm still on here,
Yep,
man.
go ahead, Councillor
I just
Taylor.
wanted to make publicly the point that what the discussion was that Dugan's, in your mind, is a good business in town. You don't mean to run down that business. You feel that it's
Absolutely.
a viable,
No
a viable
interest in
business that people should continue to spend their wares at and support in this, in
And I
this
think
community.
the next speaker that's on after that will help support that there are successful ways for businesses to operate without the sale of animals in that way. But absolutely correct, this is not about one store, and you know, we hope that they're around for the next 20 or 30 years.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Armstrong.
Thank you.
Next delegation is Casey Dunn. So your address, Ms. Dunn? Your,
My address is 41 Blackburn Street, Toronto, Ontario.
okay,
And the
Go ahead.
traffic wasn't that bad getting here.
okay, ma'am.
Okay. Mayor, councilors, thank you for having me here today. My name is Casey Dunn. I accidentally kind of became an animal advocate in 2013 when I found myself standing in front of my own city's council proposing a motion much like the one you see in front of you here today. And after that bylaw passed, I had the incredible privilege of getting to travel across Ontario, speaking in front of all sorts of councils that are concerned about this issue. I have been in Vaughan, Richmond Hill, Mississauga, Ottawa, all of those cities you saw listed a little bit earlier. I was at almost every one of those council meetings, talking to those councils, being part of those town hall meetings, and really grappling with this issue. And so I'm here today hoping that because I have been a part of so many of these conversations, I can bring a bit of that experience and knowledge as you come up to this issue today. And I just want to applaud you for having this on the agenda and for treating it as an issue worth considering in your town. I chose two topics that I hear come up the most in City Council that I thought I would try to put a little bit of light on in my quick 5 minutes here. The first one is the question of whether or not it makes sense to address this issue municipally. I know there is definitely a tendency to lean towards, well, maybe the province can do something, maybe the OSPCA can do something, maybe we can put, provincial legislature. But first and foremost, this is a municipal issue. It has been determined time and time again that the most efficient and appropriate way to deal with this is with municipal bylaws. That's because A, the municipality is the one responsible for issuing the business licenses and zoning regulations and for enforcing those. And B, just pragmatically speaking, a municipal bylaw is a much faster, easier thing to pass. And yes, we would love to see more provincial legislature, but that is a slow and onerous process that hopefully we'll see down the road. Secondly, a lot of pets that are sold in retail locations are not being bred locally. They're often being shipped in from out of province. So that could be Quebec, that could be the United States, and our provincial registrations won't make any difference for the places those animals may be coming from. The second, and I think the most important issue that is topic we're all here to talk about today is that nobody wants to hurt small business, least of all me. In my 9 to 5, when I'm not out talking about animal legislation, I am a business advisor. I work as a small business advisor in an entrepreneurship center, and I meet with businesses every day to look at how they can scale up their operations. The reality is the pet food and accessory industry is a $9 billion industry, and it's growing every day. And at the same time as that is growing, we see a growth in value-based pricing. People are willing to spend a little bit more money if they know that the product is being sourced ethically, morally, and sustainably. You might be willing to pay a couple extra dollars for that cup of coffee if you know that it's fair trade. Same thing is happening in the animal industry, where we would go into a grocery store and buy a $10 bag of puppy chow or kitty chow. Now we're going into boutique stores, talking to pet experts about, you know, proper nutrition, and spending $50 on a bag because we trust the quality of the ingredients and the nutrition. At the same time, people are putting that same attention into how they're sourcing their animals. They don't want it to be a transactional experience where they're buying an animal. They want to adopt a new member of their family. There are all sorts of opportunities. I know that passing this bylaw may cause some stores to have to transition out of selling pets a little bit faster than they would have otherwise, but it's also an incredible opportunity because there are many organizations out there that actually offer services for that exact transition. So Humane Society International, for example, has something called their Pet-Free Pledge, and any store that's willing to sign that will be put on their website, out on their social media, and will get opportunities to have in-store events and all sorts of advertising opportunities. There's also more opportunities for partnerships to develop in the community with rescues and shelters, which can produce alternate streams of revenue. So I don't think that this kind of bylaw has to be a death sentence. Rather, it is an invitation to keep up with consumer trends and where the market is naturally going anyway. Thank you so much for having me out, and I'd be happy to answer any questions if I can.
Yes, thank you. Councillor Peters.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Through you, since you seem to have done this before and you're probably very familiar with some of the bylaws existing in other towns, can you comment on sort of the breadth of bylaw between municipalities? Are there any out there that have enacted more of an enforcement role rather than an outright ban? Or what sort of spectrum of bylaws are out there with respect to the sales?
So typically what we've seen is a restriction of sales to where the animals are being obtained from. So typically we see, rather than using the word ban, a restriction on the sale of animals that are sourced from commercial breeding facilities and moving towards adoption and partnerships that way so that stores can still have animals available in the stores, but they have to be sourced from registered nonprofits, shelter agencies, that kind of thing. That's been, I think, the case in almost every city I've been in, as well as kind of a time period for that transition to happen.
Okay. I had a couple of questions as well, Ms. Dunn. So I read a lot of the documentation here, and I think I came up with 13 municipalities in Ontario that have passed bylaws. There's over 100 municipalities of 10,000 or more in Ontario, and many more smaller. So do you feel that this is catching on? Is it something that's going to catch fire across the province? And as a secondary question, it seems like, to me, this is like, are you concerned at all about sales on Kijiji, for instance? And have you, as an activist, have you looked at municipalities that are supporting puppy mills, of which I don't think any are in Orangeville that I know of, but you know, have you tackled that issue? Because that seems like starting at the source, you know, of trying to stop these puppy mills would be a good place to spend some time and energy, right?
We've got 3 questions in there, I think. So as per the first one, is this spreading? So we started in Toronto Central, downtown. And if I had a map, which sometimes I bring with me, I would show how the GTA has basically all joined. So we started Toronto, then it was Mississauga, Vaughan, Richmond Hill. It spread to Oshawa, it spread up to, we're going to Newmarket. So really, yes, I think it is spreading. It's starting in perhaps some more urban areas, but we are seeing it go. And as I also mentioned, the trend is already away from selling animals, live animals in stores. 90% of stores have already made that transition. So I think it's happening simultaneously, that these bans are happening, these stores are seeing kind of the writing on the wall, and it's kind of all changing together. So the bans may not be necessary in the future, as that is not really a viable business model anymore anyways. To talk to the issue of Kijiji, definitely online sales is an issue. I think there's maybe a bit of confusion surrounding the word puppy mill. It gets thrown around a lot, and I don't think we have perhaps a clear definition that we all agree on what a puppy mill is. But typically we're referring to farms where those animals are bred en masse. So we're talking of, you know, hundreds of breeding dogs in a barn. That's not an illegal situation. That's perfectly legal here in Ontario. It's a registered business. So puppy mills are not something that are illegal. They're not something that are getting shut down. It's just a matter of public opinion that we're trying to move away from that. So can the OSPCA do anything about so-called puppy mills? The answer is no. They're registered businesses right now as our animal laws stand. Will that change soon? As it was alluded to, definitely our provincial laws are in flux right now, and it's hard to know where that's going to end up. And I hope to see more provincial legislation. They just passed about whales and orcas in captivity. So I mean, we're seeing things happen all the time, and hopefully that that angle will also be attacked. But I would urge council today to consider, while there are issues we can't tackle, we can't stop Kijiji, we can't do things on a national scale, but there is stuff that we can do here today that we do have the power to do. So I'd say let's focus on that for now.
All right. Any other questions for Ms. Dunn? Seeing none, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Okay, next delegation, David Adsetts. Mr. Adsetts.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of council. Sit down if I can. So to begin with, I would just like to address a couple of the issues that have been presented here tonight. Thank you very much. Their document points out that there are other towns, as you've been discussing, that have passed similar bylaws to what they're asking you to enact on here in Orangeville. Just to quote some different figures than what you did, Mr. Mayor. They have listed 13 on their presentation. This is a stats can figure, so it might be right or might be wrong, but it's from the last census, anyways, in 2017, I think it was, that there are 444 incorporated municipalities in Ontario. So this 14 that have passed this type of legislation represent about 3% of that total number of Ontario towns, cities, municipalities. If you expand that to all of Canada, and they have added another 15, I think, towns, which brings it to a total of 28. Of the 887 towns and cities across the country, that still leaves us with a 3% number of municipalities that have decided to enact on this type of legislation. So what this means in the end is that an overwhelming, just one further note, if you go south of the border, they use a figure of 300 municipalities there. That still just represents 1.5% of all the municipalities in the United States. So what this means in the end is that 97% of Canadian municipalities and over 98% of American municipalities have not chosen to embrace this type of bylaw that they are asking you to enact today. Secondly, on their presentation again, they represent SPCA statistics, and a friend behind me here, sorry, I forget his name, Grant, suggested that, or he went through the figures for cats, showing that there were higher adoptions and lower euthanasia rates, and suggesting that's because of the enactment of these bylaws, where the same, if you read further in this Humane Canada website, they tell you that that is because of a change in the way that SPCAs are handling feral cats, bringing them into their facilities. Instead of just euthanizing them, now they are spaying and neutering and putting them back out on the street as it would be. So they're having tremendous success with that, along with other spay and neuter programs in towns like Orangeville. If you go to the dogs, which he didn't go down his charts there too, but his numbers actually show, these are Humane Canada numbers again, actually show that the number of adoptions has decreased over the same 9 years that it encompasses, only by a small amount, but there has been a decrease, not an increase as he's suggesting. One of the big points to make as well is that pet stores don't provide any guarantees, any health guarantees for their pets that they sell. In our case, this is not a fact. The truth is that we not only provide health guarantees for all of the pets that we sell, but we offer in writing 100% money-back guarantee for each and every one. This includes not only puppies, kittens, and bunnies, but hamsters, guinea pigs, geckos, finches and budgies, and anything else too numerous to mention, but every pet that leaves our store. I'd like to take you back now 15 years, if I can, to the year 2004, when in Orangeville here, there was introduced a draft legislation of a pet shop bylaw. After more than a year of consultation with various industry groups and interested parties, this Orangeville pet shop bylaw became legislation. This bylaw governs all aspects of running a business that provides pets to our community, including what we as pet shop owners are allowed to sell and not allowed to sell, how we house our pets, how we are required to look after them. I'm proud to say that over the course of the past 14 years, since this bylaw was enacted, there's never been once a concern voiced by the town about our sourcing of pets from inappropriate or disreputable breeders of any sort. Furthermore, over the same period, we have always operated within the constraints specified by this document, and never has there been a notice of infringement against any of the rules and regulations set out therein regarding our business. On to lighter topics, the recent social media propaganda. Some of you might be aware of that. This has done nothing but ironically strengthen our business. Customers, new and old, have taken the time to voice their support for us about what we do and how we do it. Throughout the social media insanity, which it was for us, new customers, having now been made aware of our store, are flocking in record numbers, all resulting in us having just finished our most successful year ever. I'd also like to mention regarding this that we don't advertise at all. Every customer we have has found us by word of mouth, and now I guess by Facebook posts. So in conclusion, I would offer this for your consideration. If we continue to operate in a professional manner, in a regulated industry, following all of the guidelines set out for us, as we have done for 39 years, why would you as town council see fit to enact legislation to put an end to this? At the very least, should you decide, after all is said and done, that you feel there is a need to protect the public by changing our current bylaw, I would hope that you would also see fit to exclude our family business by grandfathering us into any changes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Adsett. Councillors, do we have anybody who wish to ask Mr. Adsett any questions? No. Okay. Whoops.
Thanks for your time.
Perfect timing. Thank you, sir. So under 7.14, we had some correspondence as well that was sent in regarding this issue, and we have town council has received all of this correspondence and reviewed it. Any further comments? Councillor Post.
All right. This is an extremely emotional topic. As you can see from both sides, both were extremely passionate about their sides, and I can respect it. As a rescue supporter myself, the heart side of me really sympathizes fully with that side of the argument. However, that being said, the business side of me is not prepared to create a bylaw that's going to affect a business that's been in town for 40 years. We have to, as council, I think we have a responsibility to protect our small business community. Mr. Adsett has been running a reputable business for 40 years, following all of the legislature, has had a few times the OSPCA has been in, and he's been following all regulations. He's made any changes that were necessary. So with all of that being said, I'd be happy to put a motion on the floor to create a bylaw that would prohibit new businesses coming to Orangeville from selling animals. And I do recommend that we grandfather in Dugan's and Mr. Adsett for a period of, I don't know what that is, whether it's a certain number of years or whether it's as long as he owns the business. I would definitely look to my fellow council for perhaps suggestions on whether it's for a number of years. I think it would be an awful shame to see a business such as Mr. Adsett's be affected by a bylaw of this nature. But like I said, as a rescue supporter, I'm all on board with what they're saying, and I would not want to see an unreputable business coming into town selling animals. So I'm happy for suggestions if somebody, I would move the motion if someone wants to give suggestions. Is it 5 years? Is it 10 years? What does that look like? I'm happy for suggestions.
Okay. Let's see, Ms. Deputy Mayor McIntosh.
Thank you. Through you, Worship. I do feel for Mr. Adsett. However, this is an outdated practice that's going on. And I do think the town bylaw, as you stated, was 2004. I think it needs to be looked at again. And instead of setting any times and dates on it, I would refer it back to staff to give us some options in regards to a new bylaw. And I look to the clerk if that's acceptable to do that.
Okay. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Councillor Post and Deputy Mayor McIntosh. I appreciate your comments. I guess for me, my message would be for all of Orangeville and people in this room that you should shop at Dugan's. Please go in there. Please patronize the place. Please buy your products and needs in the store. I have listened to Councillor Post, whom I respect greatly. I'm not at the point where I'm ready to go forward with what you're suggesting, although I sympathize with your comments. I would be more interested in pursuing what Deputy Mayor McIntosh has to say at this point and reconsider at another time. So I think Councillor Post actually has a motion on the floor, so we'd have to vote to that first, but that would be how I feel about things at this time.
So, Councillor Post, can you just reiterate what your thoughts were on this? Yeah, go right ahead.
So again, I was looking for some help from fellow councillors. I'm happy to support deputy mayors and rescind my motion at this time. What I was looking for more specifically was a bylaw that would prevent the new businesses coming to Orangeville from selling animals, and that we look for a time frame that we could grandfather Dugan's into continuing his business practice as has been. So again, I'm happy to rescind that if we want to move forward with deputy mayor's motion. Or if somebody has suggestion on timelines, I'm happy with that as well.
Okay, let's hear from Councillor Andrews.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate the Deputy Mayor stepping forth with that particular recommendation for staff to take a look at this. I'm going to say something that, may be forceful, but, when we have Orangeville businesses, and I understand Mr. Armstrong was very clear that the social media campaign had nothing to do with the organization. I don't like when businesses in our community are targeted, be that inside, outside. And, here you have a business that's been in this community for a very, very long time. And I was actually pleased to hear that Mr. Adsett had indicated that business is actually thriving. And we want to see the businesses continue to thrive in our community. That's one of the reasons we're up here, is to ensure that we have a healthy economy. As we look forth to, I'm hoping that council will agree to this, moving forth with a staff report. I think that would help us out tremendously in moving forth with making the right decision.
Right. I agree, and I think we know there's at least 13 municipalities have got bylaws, and I think if we could ask town staff to review that and bring a report back to us, I think that would be a prudent thing to do at this point. So if Councillor Post is okay withdrawing, I would second Deputy Mayor McIntosh's motion to put this back to our town staff to provide a further report in an upcoming council session. And I personally am more in favor of what Councillor Post has said, which is, a moratorium going forward on new businesses to satisfy the issue that seems to be out there, but to protect Mr. Adsett, as long as he continues to operate his business in a fair and ethical manner as far as the treatment of animals is concerned. And I think most of us up here, I think all of us are animal lovers. I have a dog. I mean, we're all concerned about animal welfare, and we want to make sure that this town is, you know, considered to be, you know, one of the towns that is very concerned with animal welfare. But I think, as Councillor Andrews said, the unwarranted attack that came from outside of this jurisdiction on social media was unwarranted and quite ugly in some cases. So I'm sorry that it happened. Any other further questions or comments here? Maybe we can vote on that motion. All in favor? Okay. So for those of you in the room, I think we're going to hopefully come up with a hybrid solution here that will satisfy most people, and look forward to bringing this back for further discussion in an upcoming council meeting. Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on now. The next delegation is Mr. Ron Lehman. Mr. Lehman.
Do I smell?
No, those folks were here for one issue tonight, Mr. Lehman, so. Yeah. So,
Boy,
you.
I got your attention now.
Yes, sir.
Oh, okay, Mayor Brown, councilors, deputy mayor, my name is Ron Lehman, I live at L9W1C6. By the way, after 4.5 months, you folks still look bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and still ready to go, and I'm glad to see that. That's very encouraging.
Thank you.
The tone of my presentation tonight, and perhaps all the things over the years on this issue of speeding in our town, and especially on Elizabeth Street, is really that, speeding. If we don't address things, the police department, as we still have an officer here, says, once they address the speeding on Blind Line, everybody slows down on Blind Line. So I'm advocating all the things that I'm talking about tonight is a 30-kilometer-an-hour speed limit in Orangeville, the whole town. A lot of cities and towns have adopted it, and they're happy they did, not just in Canada and the United States, but in Europe. So anyway, let me get into this. Elizabeth Street began as a residential street. Is that loud enough? Can you all hear me?
I think we can hear you.
It has since
Thank
morphed into different byways, the latest being a quarter-mile speed test track, complete with all the dangers of its present faux usage of defying the posted speed limit of 40 kilometers an hour between Ada and Amelia Streets and on down to First. Other than a 100-year-old jail courthouse, many other public buildings have sprung up, i.e. a school, medical malls, a former hospital, residence, etc. Does being a public facility community give drivers going to these and other venues in town after a local visit or using Elizabeth Street as a bypass the option of breaking the law? The answer is no. I've spoken with many tenants in this area, and the question is, should it be allowed to continue? Not one gave it a thumbs up. So everybody's against this speeding thing. Does anyone know how many minor collisions have occurred on the street in the past 10 years? No, nobody keeps track of it. You can read newspapers, you can do everything, but you'll never find out. There's been lots of them. I have one lady who parks across the street, dropping her daughter off for school. Her car has been hit 3 times. 3 times, and she really looks after her car. And she's mad about it. I said, what are you going to do about it? She says, what can you do? Anyway, if someone does, they certainly don't publish their findings so residents can protest the needed changes with some reward. I don't know the answer to the collision question, but I would answer should the speed limit be lowered to 30 kilometers an hour with a resounding yes. And in the meantime, should we have motorists speeding to be shown on an overhead speed signs with the signs, like the signs in Blind Line? A yes is long overdue. We need speed signs that flash your speed as you're coming to that sign. You know, where I live, years ago I had wires put across at my request that the Works Department puts them in. We had people going 100 kilometers an hour past my house. The short from Amelia Street to my house is 3 houses, and they go 100. These cars today are fast, 100. And the speed limit then, at my insistence, was 40, and it's still 40. So when are we going to address this? If we don't start addressing these things now, the speeding becomes the norm. The speed limit doesn't mean a darn thing, not a thing. And this is what's going on in our town today, unless we control it. And this is your responsibility. This is why you people are here. This is why we voted you in, to do this kind of a job for us. And there are other councillors here who've had some issues recently about this. If we let the speeding and recklessness continue, it will become the norm for how our neighborhoods are lived in. And I, for one, am not in favor of this modicum, so I plead with you, Mr. Mayor and Council, to heed the request for adjustments to the speed limits on Elizabeth Street and even the entire town, and some speed limit signs that publish people's speed on my little piece of Elizabeth Street between Ada and Amelia Street. I'm fed up with it, and the noise. My property goes right down to the street, and I'm out breaking the lawn the other day, getting all the pine cones off. And I'm that far from a car going by me at, I don't know how fast, but the sound of it. I sleep in the back of our property. I get woken up at 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning with trucks going down, and the sound of a truck on a residential street. There are people living on this street. I live on this street, and I have been there for 25 years. It was quiet when I moved in, and now it's just a madhouse. The sound of a truck going, and these guys are pulling trucks. They don't care how fast they're going. Nobody is stopping them on a regular basis to say, you ain't going to speed on this street again. That's why we need to notify people with these signs. Please, slow down. You're breaking the law. Anyway, I hope if you approve of these signs, speed signs going up between Ada and Amelia, or even the whole of Elizabeth Street, will be quickly, and will receive your call and help remove the thunder of cars, especially trucks, from our street. I just call that thunder. It's just thunder. And my wife and I sit in our home, we watch television, and you know, Elizabeth Street isn't that wide a street. Everybody thinks, oh, it's a wide street. It's not. Where I sit and watch television isn't 45 feet from the street. And a truck goes by at 50 kilometers, 60, 70. What do you think it sounds like? It sounds like he's going right by me in front of my television. And I'm not complaining. I'm not lying about it. Come down to my house sometime and sit and watch TV with me and take a look at it. And you'll change your mind pretty fast about all this. Anyway, I want to thank you very much for listening to me tonight. I hope you do something about this, not just for me and Elizabeth Street, but for the whole town. We need to slow down, get people. They're not going to slow down. The driving public are not going to slow down. And this is also indigenous of Toronto. Go to any town. They'll tell you the same thing. We're tired of the people speeding. Talk to any police officer, and they're tired of it.
Okay. Mr. Lehman, thank you for your presentation. We have questions. Mr. Taylor.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Mr. Lehman, for your presentation. I am involved in at least 6 different projects around the city right now about community safety efforts, and happy to be involved. One of the things I have learned is to understand the facts of what the situation is, and I think Mr. Jones has some information for us that he's going to share about Elizabeth Street.
Could you talk out towards me? My hearing is starting to go.
Certainly, thank you. The piece that I'm learning is that to show up by yourself and ask for something to be done doesn't always work. Do you have your neighbors? Do you have a petition? Have you? I'm not challenging your community activism at all, Mr. Lehman. To me, what I've learned is you need to have followership on an issue that's demonstrated and shown, and you're here by yourself, so it's difficult to push something forward. Okay, thank you.
And Mr. Lehman, I looked at the history here, so it looks like 5 years ago you were in front of town council, and you did successfully get a reduction from 50 to 40 on Elizabeth Street, is that correct? Yeah, yeah, okay. Councillor Peters.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Lehman, for coming out and describing the scenario on Elizabeth. I'm not too far away. I know the downtown core sometimes is a bit dicey with respect to traffic, and I think what you'll find, and I'd ask for a bit of patience, I suppose, in this regard, we're having a number of these issues come to us. My personal belief is that a more wide lens needs to be put to this, rather than a specific street or issue. It's not just drivers, it's pedestrians, it's cyclists, it's speed limits, it's all these things. And so, you know, I think what you'll find this term is that there are groups starting, like the Drive Safe Orangeville group. There are aspects to, say, the Cycling and Trails Master Plan and how people move around this town and interact with vehicles that are all going to start to kind of rise to the top here. And, you know, I think the approach of council should be over this term to look from that wide lens. And if, you know, it happens to be a town-wide speed limit, if it happens to be certain traffic calming measures, if it happens to be an educational campaign, whatever these measures, you know, they need to be investigated on a town-wide basis. And I think, you know, you certainly have 7 interested parties around this table in community safety and active transportation and that sort of thing. So I'd ask for a bit of patience. I know you've been at this a long time, but without looking at that wider lens, we could undo some safety aspects by implementing either the wrong ones or in the wrong locations. So I think, you know, we're tasked with taking that higher level look at the whole situation, and certainly that's something I'm interested in, and we've seen other councillors propose some of these issues as well. So this issue is not going away, and we do need to work on it, but perhaps street-specific issues or implementations won't necessarily serve the town in the best regard, and that's sort of my my take on it.
Right. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Lehman. So I certainly, just a sec, we've got Councillor Andrews, but what Councillor Peters said, I think, is what we all feel, that we're going to be looking at this in a wider lens, and with the assistance of town staff, and we'll try and implement some things going forward that will help the situation. Councillor Andrews? Of course, we can do that. Councillor Andrews.
Through your worship, I think I'll just reserve my comments to expedite the rest of this agenda, because I think everyone else has said exactly what I was going to say. But thank you, Mr. Lehman, for being here, and I know that the other councillors who have expressed sincere gratitude towards your presentation, we will also allow town staff to provide us with some guidance on this too.
Thank you, Mr. Lehman. Appreciate it. Okay, moving along. So we have no statutory public. Attaboy. Go Leafs. All right. Statutory public meetings, we have none. We have no consent motions. Moving on to staff reports. So we have a recommendation that the Cultural Plan Task Force. Pardon? Oh, that's been pulled. I'm sorry. Okay. Pulling that one. Going on to 10.2. This is a recommendation that the report for Quality Management System Policy update be received, and the council approve the updated Quality Management System Policy as set out in this report. Any comments? Okay. Councillor Peters is recommending we receive it, seconded by Deputy Mayor McIntosh. All in favor? Okay, moving on to 10.3. Again, Joint Municipal Water Supply Management Model. Recommendation that this report be received and that council appoint a member as the Orangeville Council representative to the Dufferin Area Source Water Protection Work. Working Group. Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. On this topic, I was reading through sort of the cross-jurisdictional nature of this group, and without putting anybody on the spot, I thought perhaps either yourself or the deputy mayor who interacts with the other townships that are our neighbors may be best to serve on this group.
Very good. Deputy Mayor? Okay, so can we, we'll have a recommendation here, a motion that Deputy Mayor McIntosh take this appointment as the Orangeville Council representative to the Dufferin Area Source Water Protection Working Group, seconded by Councillor Post. All in favor? Okay, thank you. 10.4, cannabis retail stores in Orangeville, locational criteria. And this is for a report by staff, be received, and the corporate policy entitled Policy for Recreational Cannabis Retail Store Locations in the Town of Orangeville, which will be utilized to provide feedback to the Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario on proposed cannabis retail site applications be approved. Any comments from Town Council? Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to town staff, I just had a question regarding, I believe it was called Attachment A or Schedule A. So there's a map there sort of laying out the retail zones and the school zones. As I understand it, the way the policy is set up, it will actually look for locational criteria beyond just schools. There are other sort of sensitive zones that I don't think were necessarily reflected on Schedule A. And I just wondered if I have that information correct, if that interpretation is correct, and if so, is there a separate map that would outline all of the boundary conditions associated with the locational criteria?
Mr. Ward or Mr. Jones?
Through your worship to Councillor Peters, the map attached to the policy sets out basically the existing as-is framework relative to provincial regulations. That being the prohibition on sites from locating within 150 meters from schools, as well as those areas in our zoning bylaw that are zoned to permit a retail store use, which a marijuana or a cannabis retail store would be construed as. We did contemplate introducing a map that showed other areas, those community-sensitive areas. However, we determined that it might not be prudent to identify some of those locations because there's some sensitivity or I guess a desire to have them more or less discreet within the community. So we thought that showing their locations for public display might compromise that. So we have developed an internal procedure to direct staff in keeping apprised of future retail store applications, and in doing so would search to see if there's any such community-sensitive areas located in proximity to a proposed location.
You're out of the queue, my friend. Let's go over to Councillor Andrews.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. Through you to our planning department, thank you again for the detailed map that really provided some clarity, at least from my perspective, and from the other side of my world, which is a post-secondary world. Some very clear messaging has come on how institutions across the province are managing this particular matter too as well, which is to really address it off-site, but then again that puts some offloads to the municipalities that are responsible to effectively police it too. I don't know if this is an appropriate time to include this other observation, but it is one that I read recently about the concerns from our local school boards, in particular to vaping, that has increased substantially. And this might be just another piece that we talk about at some other time, but I just wanted to bring this item to Council's attention. I know our local school board in particular has really noticed an increase because there is a lack of some form of legislation that allows that sort of thing to be addressed, but I'll leave that for another time. That's when it would be.
Let's remember to discuss that down the road. Thank you.
Unless we wanted to discuss it now, but it's, I'll await the guidance from the clerk here.
Through you, Mayor. What I can tell you is that we are looking, bylaw staff are looking at the current smoke-free Orangeville bylaw, which doesn't include vaping. We're comparing it to Smoke-Free Ontario, which does include vaping, and we also want to, basically we want to look at our bylaw, take away anything that's already contained in Smoke-Free Ontario, and add what we would like to add for vaping,
Okay.
Local use.
Well,
of
thank you very
smoking,
much for that
marijuana, vaping,
clarification. That
whatever.
provides a lot of help. Thank you.
Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, not sorry for the bouncing back and forth, but Mr. Ward, I guess what I wanted to make the point, I suppose, is that if people are looking at the map in the council agenda, that's not the entirety of the restriction on where these stores could go. There are other criteria that aren't necessarily reflected there. Is that correct?
Through you, your worship, to Councillor Peters, yes, that is correct. There are other criteria that are, I guess, described verbally in the policy that will also need to be considered.
Yeah, good, thanks.
Deputy Mayor McIntosh.
Through your worship to Mr. Ward also. This is a provincial guideline. Is there any opportunity for appeal for these people that are in the no-go zone, so to speak?
Through you, your worship, to Deputy Mayor McIntosh, there are no opportunities for appeal. These regulations are finalized and in full force.
Thank you.
Okay. So, we want to have a motion to receive this report. Councillor Peters, second by Councillor Andrews. All in favor? Yeah. You're going to have to put up with this. Yes. Madam Clerk.
Just to clarify, it was to receive the report and approve that policy.
Yes, I'm sorry. And approve that policy. We're all in agreement? Yes. Okay. Thank you. 11.1, we have a recommendation here that the minutes of the Orangeville Police Services Board meeting be received. Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, Your Worship. I just wanted to make a comment with regards to the minutes. I can see in the minutes that it's been stated that the province newly appointed a member, Mary Rose, which I think is a great choice, and very happy to see her on the board. But I was just wondering if there's any type of notification form for council to be notified of these provincial appointments or contract renewals in the future, rather than hearing through it through other sources or secondhand. I know that in the other committees, council chooses who's on there, and that isn't the case here in the for the Police Services Board. But I would hope that it would be in good transparency to keep the council informed of any membership changes. Just a comment.
Okay. I think typically, though, in our Police Service Board meetings, those issues are contained within the minutes, and I guess we need to maybe get them out quicker, maybe. I don't know, but in terms of those appointments, when did we learn about that, Todd? Do you recall?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship, and thank you for your question. That appointment is done by the province, and everybody who's watching on TV or whatnot should know that council has nothing to do with that. There's appointed members by the province, and there's appointed members by this council. And I think the mayor and myself were both surprised at who was in, not because I don't think that Ms. Rose is a qualified candidate. I just wasn't aware of who it was or what was going on. It's done entirely through the province with no influence by us. So I don't think there's anything we could do other than maybe have a report at a council meeting post. But that seems inappropriate too, because the minutes aren't approved yet. But I don't know how you do that.
Yeah. So we did learn about, I'm going to guess 30 days ago, that Ms. Rose was appointed. I think in my case, I think I did hear about it in advance of that meeting, but I think the correct, process is through the Police Service Board committee and the minutes. That's the correct procedure to release that type of information, I believe. So, we can try and accelerate that, or I certainly would be interested in letting you know next time, in a quicker manner, if you wish. So we'll work on that. Yeah, Councillor Andrews.
Just a comment through you, Your Worship. Just wanted to congratulate the 10 employees who ended up receiving their 100% attendance for exemplary service, or a combination of both. But one of the pieces that was noted in that particular report. Oh, excuse me.
Okay. So we have a recommendation that the minutes be received. May I have a motion? Councillor Taylor, seconded by Councillor Post. All in favor? Okay, moving on to item 12, question period. Do we have anybody in the audience who would like to pose questions? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to 13.1 through 13.6. This is correspondence. There's a recommendation that we receive these items. Any questions from council on any of these items of correspondence? Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, Your Worship, with regards to 13.3 and the one-time payment of $563,000, perhaps staff could clarify, was this new money or was it budgeted? Was it expected in the budget?
Mr. Brennan?
Your Worship, through you, this is new money. I think the one thing to remember right now is the new government that's in place, our new provincial government. There is, some programs, OCIF and top-up funds. So there are some programs being eliminated, but there's also the announcement of new programs. And I think with time we'll figure out exactly where we balance out with the total dollars coming to the town. But this is new money. And what staff will do is to come back with some recommendations of how to spend that money within the guidelines that the province is setting.
Great. Okay. I've got another question before we go on to Councillor Andrews and Taylor, Mr. Brennan. That is this amount of money, $563,000. We saw what the other municipalities in Dufferin received, and the town of Shelburne, population of about 9,200. And the town of Mono, population of about 7,500, received roughly the same amount of money as the town of Orangeville, population 29,000 and growing. Did you, I know we talked about this, did you receive any further clarification on how that money was determined, that amount of money?
Your Worship, at this time we have not got the clarification. We do have questions out, and we're hoping to get connected with the right people at the ministry to provide clarification on those questions.
Yeah, I think that letter came in from Minister Steve Clark. Yeah, so. One other question, I have one other question, 13.1, this infrastructure and communities, Minister of Infrastructure and Communities gas tax fund money, March 27th. Can you comment on that, Mr. Brennan, in the amount that could be? And is this the public transit money that was talked about? Do you recall?
Your Worship, I'm just looking right now to make sure I have the right one, and this is the public transit portion of the gas tax fund. There is an amount in there, but we do have to apply for that. We have to apply, and there's a certain amount from both provincial and federal, and then we would have a matching. I think our infrastructure services people are working on an application as we speak. There is a close timeline to get the reports in.
End of May for application? Is that, I think?
Mr. Jones, you have the timeline. Is it the end of May?
Mr. Jones.
Your Worship, I believe that it is the end of May, but certainly there have been a number of these funding opportunities that have been announced in recent weeks. There's also been funding that's been withdrawn in recent weeks, and staff are currently reviewing which ones we need to apply for and when, and assuredly we will be trying to maximize the amount of federal and provincial money that we can use for town projects.
Right. I believe it was somewhere in the order of $2 million available, of which we would have to provide $680,000 in order to get that full grant, I believe. Councillor Andrews.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. This is kind of directed, I guess, through the town clerk to town staff, and this is item 13.2 regarding the James Bay flood season possible evacuation. Some of the questions that were posed in this particular letter indicated very clearly this would be something that could be supported. At this point, I'd like, I guess, pose the question, how would we support if there were evacuees to come here? And has there been some consultation with other counties? In this case would be the County of Dufferin. I'm not sure who would be responsible to respond to that particular point.
Mr. Brennan?
Your Worship, through you, we have not had consultation with members of other municipalities at this time. I think it was last week this notice came in. I think it was through yourself, Your Worship. We do not have social housing at our level of governance, the lower tier. I guess if we were to approach this, we could use one of our recreation centers or something of that nature to set up a sort of a housing or a center. I'm not sure if that is the approach or if that is the need at this time, or what is the pressure on the provincial government to find other locations to resettle on a temporary basis. We could look at it closer and reach out to our municipal and our provincial partners to see if there's still a need and come back to council. I'm not aware of if there's funding support for the municipalities or if the expectation is that a lot of the municipalities would step up and pay for the full support.
Do you have a sense of the likelihood of this happening, and what would be the numbers if it was to be requested by this municipality to provide some support?
Again, through your worship, there was no numbers attached. If I'm not mistaken, from one of the articles I read earlier, I thought there's about 1,500, whether that's families or people that they were looking at relocating. I think some of the relocation may have already started to happen because of the floods. But again, we could...
The Maple Leafs scored
Encore.
The Maple Leafs scored a goal, right?
The Leafs scored that? Oh.
But again, if that is something that this council wishes, we could follow up and do more research on it and bring it back at our next council meeting, if council wishes.
So there's also the likelihood that some other municipalities, maybe a little bit closer, have already stepped up, and and as you've indicated very clearly, there may be already some evacuees who've been relocated temporarily. Okay, thank you, Mr. Brennan.
Okay, Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, so sorry to interrupt everybody this evening with my music, but I was searching for the gas tax piece with the Ontario budget, and apparently it comes with music, so that's lovely. I guess my confusion moving forward, and as we go into budget time, more of a statement than anything, is it feels like the gas tax situation is changing significantly, which could put pressure on the municipality and our budget plans for next year. So I guess my ask is, and I don't require a statement now, but as soon as we understand what that is, it would be good to have a preliminary report from staff, Mr. Brennan, just to get a grasp on what that could mean, because it could be significant to us in terms of what a tax increase would be for 2020. So it just makes me a little bit nervous as I try and digest what that is. Please don't play it because it comes with music, as we know.
Okay, Mr. Brennan.
Yes, Your Worship, through you. I think at this stage what we're trying to do is monitor all the changes of the programs that are being canceling or being reduced or actually being changed, the criterias of the grants and everything being changed. And I think in fairness to our new provincial government, it's taking time. There's been a lot of change, and we certainly have to figure out in the short order as we move forward what is the true impact on a municipality with all those changes. And when we do, we certainly will be bringing it back to council.
Okay. So right now we're back to a motion to receive all of this correspondence, 13.1 to 13.6. A motion, Councillor Post, seconded by Councillor Peters. All in favor? Thank you. Moving on to item 14.1. This is information items, 14.1 through 14.5. So let's go to 14.1, heritage permit application. This looks like it's for a sign, which town staff is asking us to approve. We've got 2019 summer hours for the municipal offices. We have a report on new businesses in Orangeville from our economic development department. We have an investment report on the investments that the town has currently, and then we have 14.5, which is a proposed four-way stop at College and Fieldgate. Councillor Taylor.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I guess I'd like to speak to 14.5, and that is I'd like to thank Mr. Jones and staff for their report, and I'd also like to thank staff for their help in understanding the report. I met with Mr. Jones this week, just making sure I understood what all the parameters of that were. And I guess my message is to those residents in the area, we will have to regroup, and we'll chat about what next steps are, and we'll figure out where we go from here. So. I guess we'll be back to council at some point in the near future when we find out what the wishes of the residents are.
Very good. Okay, Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Also on 14.5, and through you to Mr. Jones, if you don't mind. I don't expect you to have this answer right away, but as many will know, the only true pedestrian crossing we have in town is at Alder. That was obviously a result of some activities there. Pedestrian activity at this intersection is also seeming to be a concern, and the report outlined just how many crossings took place and on what direction, that sort of thing. I was wondering, Mr. Jones, if you had a sense of the daily crossings at the Alder location as a point of reference for where that, in that case, the pedestrian crossing infrastructure was warranted.
Mr. Jones.
Through your worship to Councillor Peters, I don't have that information off the top of my head, but if you give me a few minutes, I may be able to find it.
Okay. Councillor Andrews.
Thank you very much, Your Worship, and through you, just wanted to make a comment about the success stories of the new businesses in item 14.3, which is, for those that are watching, is a brief report highlighting the new businesses in Orangeville from January 1st to March 31st, 2019. It is wonderful to see the number of people who are investing in our community, who are in fact putting some hard-earned dollars to open some new businesses. And as the chair of the new committee, I'm absolutely delighted to see this. And this is just for this first quarter. So let's see that we have some other positive news that will continue in this calendar year.
Yes, and Orangeville continues to grow its culinary
yes.
Role here in Dufferin County and in North Caledon with Chuck's Roadhouse. Has any of you been in there, by the way? Yeah, and Nella's Jerk. Good spot. So yeah, that's great. Thank you for that comment, Councillor Andrews. So we just want to have a motion here to receive these reports. Councillor Sherwood, seconded by Deputy Mayor McIntosh. All in favor? Notice of motion prior to meeting. Any of those? We don't have any. Notice of motion at meeting. Deputy Mayor McIntosh.
Thank you, Your Worship. Bear with me. Whereas traffic signal synchronization can have an impact on traffic flow and may reduce unnecessary idling at signalized intersections, and whereas it is desirable to improve the flow of traffic on Central Broadway in the downtown core. Therefore be it resolved that staff be directed to review the timing and synchronization of traffic signals on Central Broadway and report back to council with recommendations for adjustment so that traffic moves more effectively.
Okay. Do we have a seconder for that? Councillor Andrews. Pardon me? It'll be coming next time. Yes, that's correct. I'm sorry. Comment from Councillor Andrews.
Again, I have seconded and also endorsed the motion by Deputy Mayor McIntosh. For those of us who gingerly use the downtown core at the appropriate time, I think the synchronization would be something that would be tremendously helpful in moving traffic both east and also westbound.
Right, so that notice of motion at this meeting will be dealt with at next meeting. Thank you, Deputy Mayor McIntosh. Okay, unfinished business. We have no new business. Councillor Andrews?
Just a very brief update on one of the most recently appointed committees or boards, the PO board, POA, I should say, board. Members of council have received a comment as well as some information.
That's Provincial Offenses Act
board, correct.
Okay.
So members of council have received it. I just wanted to, again, highlight a couple of things so that members of the audience might be wondering a little bit about this particular board. And again, I know that at various times throughout this council term, members of council who chair different committees will provide, under new business, some information. One thing that really caught my eye was not only the number of tickets, but speeding tickets that our Orangeville Police Services have been able to hand out appropriately. I think that this is something that needed to be addressed, and I was also pleased to see that OPS has provided the necessary paperwork in a very timely fashion as required in the court system. So again, members of council have received this, but just some highlight points that I thought were very important to share with the public as well.
Thank you, Councillor.
And the other point, Mayor, I
Yes,
just
sir.
wanted to highlight under new business, again, since we are getting close to the end of this meeting, we are coming to the final 2 weeks of the academic term in the post-secondary system, and I want to congratulate and also encourage our students at both community colleges we have in town to do their best, and wish them lots of luck as they go through their final assignments and their final exams over the next couple of weeks.
Great. Thank you for that. Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll also be brief, and it's also on the topic of committees. Again, for anyone watching this or in the room, tomorrow we kick off the very first Sustainable Orangeville Committee, formerly OSAT, and there has been a lot of work that the town has been put into Earth Week activities, which will take place not this week, but next week after Easter weekend, including bike workshop, movie screenings, tree plantings, etc. So I would encourage everybody to check out those events and attend as many as you can. They should be lots of fun and very productive. And also, next council meeting, we'll be giving out the Sustainability Awards, which I'm also looking very much forward to, and would encourage anybody to attend or watch that presentation when it happens 2 weeks from now.
Thank you, Councillor Peters. Any other comments under new business? I'm sorry, Mr. Jones.
Through your worship, I do have an answer to Councillor Peters' question now. The PXO of Alder Street at Montgomery, the counts for pedestrians between 8 a.m. and 4 p.m. were in the order of 529 crossings.
Right. Okay. All right, moving on to item 19, which is recommendation that our confirming bylaws be passed, a bylaw to confirm appointments to various boards and committees, and a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the Council of the Corporation Town of Orangeville at its regular and closed council meetings held on April 15, 2019. We have a motion, Councillor Post, seconded by Councillor Sherwood. All in favor? Okay, and we're at the end of our meeting. May I have a motion to adjourn? Councillor Taylor, seconded by Deputy Mayor McIntosh. All in favor? We are adjourned. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.